Traditionally, the Brasenose Hell-Fire Club flourished in the 1820s based on the famous Hellfire Club of Wilkes and Dashwood. Its hallmarks were a flamboyant atheism and straightforward drunkenness, at a time when both these attributes were an essential for any self-respecting student. The college authorities knew what was going on, of course. They weren't stupid, but there wasn't an awful lot they could do unless there was some sort of flagrant breach of university discipline. What they had to do was to wait until somebody put a foot wrong. They could wait. Brasenose Lane hasn't changed much in 200 years. The north wall of the college still faces the old Exeter College garden, creating a very narrow, dark thoroughfare by night. And at the bottom of the college wall, the windows remain barred.
In addition, the ground floor windows had stout wire netting twisted around the bars, so it was impossible to push so much as a hand through them. This was the background against which the Reverend T.T. Churton, Fellow of the College and later Vice Principal, is said to have been making his way down the lane one evening in December, just before the end of term. It was coming up to midnight and fairly dark, as the lane's never been lit by more than 1 or 2 lamps. Nevertheless, Churton thought he could make out a figure standing by one of the ground floor windows. A tall man, apparently wrapped in some sort of long cloak. A few steps further, and he was able to identify the window. It belonged to the rooms of an undergraduate who was known to be one of the foremost members of the Hellfire Club. The tall figure seemed to be helping someone to clamber out through the window, and Churton speeded up his pace. Sneaking out of college after the lodge gate was locked was a serious offence, and this might give him the opportunity to discipline one of the more notorious members of Brasenose. Until suddenly, he was struck with a clammy terror, as something very obvious occurred to him.
It simply wasn't possible for anyone to get out of that window. The bars, the netting, were firmly in place. You could barely get a hand out, and yet clearly the figure was being drawn bodily through the window. And as Churton got closer, he could see the tall figure more clearly, and something about it gave him an imperative desire to be somewhere, anywhere, other than in a dark, lonely lane, late at night, with something that looked like that.
Instead of collaring the figure as he'd intended, he dashed past the scene, but not so quickly that he couldn't recognize the distorted face of the undergraduate, screaming as he was forced through the bar.
Churton came racing round into Ratcliffe Square and hammered on the gates of the porter's lodge, half fainting with shock. Just as the porter opened the gates, there was a tremendous cry from an old quad over to the right. Here, staircase 5, the very rooms where the Hellfire Club had been meeting.
And members of the Hellfire Club came tumbling out into the night. They were missing their president for the occasion, the young undergraduate whom Churton had seen being dragged out of the window by the tall stranger. On entering the undergraduate's rooms, the porter found him, lying dead on the floor. According to the other members of the club, he'd been halfway through a blasphemous oration when he'd burst a blood vessel and fallen dead at their feet.
The whole thing sounds like a story out of M.R. James. And yet, Falconer Madden, one of the college historians, does record a student dying of delirium tremens just around that time. What Churton saw, of course, only he knows, and, well, no one can ask him now. The story's recorded in odds and ends for 1872, but where it spent the intervening 50 years, we don't know. Either way, burst blood vessel or visitation by the devil. It doesn't say much for the student lifestyle of the 1820s. Sinners and villains. Oxford's absolutely packed with them. So just be thankful the ones we've been meeting are already dead. After all, you wouldn't want to run into any of them late at night in a dark alleyway now, would you?